So before Israel went into Gaza and started bombing everything in sight, there were talks of they're going to expand the Abraham Accords and normalize relations with a formal deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Now, since Israel has utterly destroyed Gaza and killed 43,000 Palestinians, that has kind of fallen apart. Mohammed bin Salman politically is not in a position where he could, even if he wanted to, accept a formal deal with Israel because the population is absolutely furious with Israel. But that has not stopped the U.S. from trying to continue the Trump policy of the Abraham Accords and get a normalization deal with Saudi Arabia and Israel. And the way the U.S. is doing that is basically by promising Saudi Arabia the moon and the sun. Now, I have to say up front, this is embarrassing. This is beyond embarrassing. Because first of all, the Abraham Accords was one of the things that helped lead to October 7th. The whole point of the Abraham Accords was to take Israel and make a peace deal with countries that they weren't at war with. And it was a way of trying to get the entire Arab world to recognize Israel as a middle finger to the Palestinians to basically say, you will continue to be subjugated forever. You will be oppressed forever. You will have no rights. You will not have a sovereign and free Palestinian state forever. So you had that, and you had the moving of the embassy to Jerusalem, which helped lead to October 7th, where Hamas said, oh, you're going to say fuck you to us? Well, how about fuck you right back? And then there was that massive attack on October 7th, and since then, Israel's been doing a genocide and ethnic cleansing. You all know this. Well, Trita Parsi comes out the other day and says the following. Biden is close to a deal with Saudi that would grant it uranium enrichment, oblige the U.S. to defend the dictatorship, and sell it more weapons. Wall Street Journal says the deal will entrench America's presence in the Middle East. So again, Biden is desperate right now. He keeps pretending Israel has accepted a peace deal, but Hamas has not accepted it, when the reality is exactly backwards. Hamas has accepted it. Israel has rejected it. Israel keeps reiterating, we're going to destroy all of Hamas before we do any sort of a permanent ceasefire, right? That's one front where Biden is humiliating and embarrassing. The other front is he's basically on his hands and knees begging Saudi Arabia to do a normalization deal with Israel, and in order to get that, he's promising them the sun and the moon from our perspective, from the U.S. perspective. So here we go. I got a good video on this from the Quincy Institute. Let's watch.
Why is Joe Biden determined to put U.S. troops on the line for Saudi Arabia's defense? U.S. officials keep pushing the idea that a regional grand bargain for the Middle East, establishing diplomatic relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia, will somehow resolve the Gaza crisis, create peace, and set Palestinians on an irreversible course towards statehood.
Now, Biden and the establishment Democrats, maybe they're naive enough to think that, but in reality, the whole point of this policy approach is the opposite. The whole point is normalize with the rest of the Arab world, so we say fuck you to the Palestinians, and we never have to do anything to get a peace deal and get a state.
Between Israel and Saudi Arabia, which was going to be, we still think there's hope here, to be a stepping stone to get closer to a two-state solution.
I believe we can reach an agreement which would present a historic opportunity for two nations, but also for the region as a whole.
By the way, I should point out that the reason why the U.S. is giving Saudi Arabia the moon and the sun as part of this agreement is because MBS came out and said, we are not doing any deal with Israel unless and until there's a Palestinian state granted along the 1967 borders. So he came out and said that, and then the U.S. is like, no. What if drop the 1967 borders thing, but we'll defend you no matter what. We'll give you more weapons. We'll give you uranium enrichment. By the way, this is the country where the 9/11 assailants came from. They had a huge Wahhabi and Salafist problem, where radical Islam was taught in the mosques. It would be insane to grant them uranium enrichment. What happens if MBS gets overthrown? Who takes over?
But this deal will deliver the opposite of what it promises. It's not a peace agreement, nor is it transformative. It's effectively a U.S. war obligation to Saudi Arabia, a commitment to send U.S. soldiers to war to defend the kingdom. It's a critical aspect of the mega deal not being discussed. In return for normalizing relations with Israel and a pledge of supporting talks that could, but likely won't, lead to an undefined Palestinian state in some distant future, Saudi Arabia's crown prince gets a guarantee that America will send its sons and daughters to kill and die for his dictatorship, and also give him hypersensitive nuclear technology. The deal won't address the root causes of the Gaza war or provide any real effort to resolve the decades-long Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The normalization deal was never intended to solve differences between Palestinians and Israelis. It bypassed the issue entirely and promoted the notion that economic integration between Israel and Gulf Arab states, without a Palestinian state, would somehow deliver peace to the region. And in the end, this deal is basically an extension of the Abraham Accords and cements the conflict between Israel and some Arab monarchies on one side and Iran and its partners on the other.
That's right. It's a way to try to get the dividing lines even more clear between Iran, Hamas, Hezbollah, and Lebanon and Syria versus the Arab Gulf monarchies and Israel. That's what this is. It's furthering the problem is what it's doing. It's furthering the problem. It's not a solution.
And it puts our troops in harm's way, but without providing ordinary Americans with security. Though Joe Biden wants to obligate U.S. troops to Saudi Arabia's defense, he needs to explain the human and financial costs of doing so to Americans. Why is he continuing Trump-era policies that have only escalated tensions in the region?
There's very little social redeeming value in the present government in Saudi Arabia.
2019, that's what Biden said. Remember when Trump ran in 2015 and 2016, he said they did 9/11. They were responsible for 9/11. There was a story that came out recently that they were even more directly responsible than anybody ever realized. That had government support. This is what Trump called it out before he was president. Biden called it out before he was president. And then what happened? They both cucked themselves. Trump, I mean, forget it. He's made millions and millions of dollars from Saudi Arabia directly because of the Live Golf League, how they're using his courses and paying him millions to use it. Jared Kushner got $2 billion from Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia paid Trump hundreds of thousands through his D.C. hotel, and then Trump turned around and gave them more weapons for them to do their genocide against Yemen. They didn't even give him a slap on the wrist when he massacred Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi. So both of them, before they were president, talked a big game about standing up to Saudi Arabia. As soon as they become president, they're trying to entrench us further. Now to the comical point where Biden is saying, let's send our troops in a defense pact to protect Saudi Arabia. It's beyond absurd, man. This is beyond absurd. And how many times have we seen it? Jesus Christ. The two countries where you bet your ass, no matter how rogue they act, no matter how much they act like terrorists and extremists, the two countries we always bend the knee to, Israel and Saudi Arabia. And oh, would you look at that? They have two of the biggest lobbies. The donor money and the lobbyist money comes in from there, and then our politicians bend the knee to them. I'm struggling to come up with a reason why this wouldn't be treasonous. For our politicians to more represent Saudi Arabia and Israel than represent our own people?
What's changed about the nature of our relationship with Riyadh that justifies giving them such massive concessions? What are the terms of when and how U.S. soldiers will be put in harm's way to defend Saudi Arabia? This is a country whose de facto leader's actual track record is all about sowing instability, chaos, and fear. Whether it involved the abduction of the Lebanese prime minister,
They literally abducted the Lebanese prime minister. I remember that.
of a Washington Post columnist, or a death sentence for a retired teacher who composed a tweet.
And the U.S. has the nerve to run around saying, we're protecting freedom and democracy. Now let's go defend this dictator who gave somebody the death penalty over a tweet. Jesus Christ.
Prime minister, or the killing of a Washington Post columnist, or a death sentence for a retired teacher who composed a tweet, or when he launched a war of choice in Yemen that killed thousands and starved millions. U.S. officials should stop wasting their time and political capital on a deal that basically amounts to a war obligation to Saudi Arabia, when we should be focused on a ceasefire in Gaza, bringing an end to the humanitarian disaster in which the Biden administration is complicit. U.S. troops have been obligated to the ambitions and defense of Middle East autocrats for over a generation. The autocrats want us to stay, to back their ambitions, and provide for their security at the expense of our own national interests, even if it sets us on a path to more war.
Great video here from the Quincy Institute. By the way, Saudi Arabia wants Iran gone and Israel wants Iran gone. And our government is trying to make it so we have an obligation to fight on behalf of Saudi Arabia and Israel. Hell no. Hell no. Basically, every decision that Biden's making vis-a-vis foreign policy is 100% wrong. Everyone. Look, I was the first one to give him credit and argue in favor of what he was doing when Biden pulled out of Afghanistan. I was the first one to line up and give him credit when he nearly eliminated the drone war, nearly ended the drone war. I'm fair. I'll call a spade a spade. But part of calling a spade is to point out when stuff like this happens, which is way beyond the pale. This is egregious. Imagine polling the American people what they think about this plan, what they think about this move from the Biden administration. mean, what would it come back? Under 25%? They shock me every day with how depraved and deranged they go. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.